want to note 5 steps that Jesus lays out for his disciples as he calls them to this missional movement into the world. The first is, he always sends them out at least in pairs. Fascinating. Jesus never sends his disciples out alone. The principle here is that it is out of our community, at least two kingdom people moving into the world together as a little community. Now, it could be 2, it could be 2,000. But the point is, it is in community that we do ministry. Ministry flows out of our already bonded covenant community. It also suggests that it's the quality of our relationships as kingdom people that brings the mission to the world. If 2 go out and move into a place to bring the kingdom, the people watching those 2 should notice a type of quality of relationship in that little group of agape love, other-orientedness, servant-heartedness, that should catch their attention. Our relationships are our primary message, which is just a reminder once again that of all things Christians should be experts on, we should be experts on doing relationship well. Our marriages should look qualitatively different than anyone else's marriages. Our friendships should be stronger and more resilient than anyone else's friendships. Our churches, our communities as churches, should be more self-sacrificial, more willing to defer to each other, more humble with each other than any other type of community association. Now, of course, this isn't the case. It's frequently the case that Christians' divorce rates are about the same as the culture's, or that our friendships fracture and break just as much as anyone else's, or that our churches are oftentimes places of petty disagreements and disunity and people leaving out of hurt and bitterness. But it ought not be that way. And once we can see that one of the primary callings of us as the people of God is to do relationship well, then perhaps we can start to make that front and center of what we talk about in our sermons, of what we strive to emulate in our relationships in families and in the church community itself, and how we do relationships in our workplaces, that we should be the place where everyone else on the planet comes to learn how to love well. And Jesus, he demonstrates this, the importance of this, by always sending his people out at least in 2s, because their little relationship brings a message of agape love. Secondly, he says that when you come into a new town, or we would say just any new context where we're bringing the kingdom, he says the first thing to do is speak a blessing into the lives of that place and those people. We are called to speak blessing. Look, if you're speaking blessing, it's impossible to be also self-righteously judging people. We are to move into the world on mission in a stance of humble blessing, not self-righteous judgment. And if we do that, it sets up a place for people to receive that message. It is so difficult to want to receive a message from an arrogant, self-righteous person. On the other hand, when you see humility and someone trying to bless and love on you, your heart just naturally lets down the defenses and walls. This is how God wired us. So Jesus is just reminding us, hey, here's how humans work, and here's your calling towards humans. Humble blessing, not self-righteous judgment. Next, Jesus says, dine with them. Sit down at their tables and eat with them. Now, what he's really talking about here is that dining in the ancient world was the most significant form of fellowship. One only would dine with, would eat supper with, who they felt they were equal to, or at least in the same social sphere. But Jesus tells his disciples, you go and dine with everybody. You break all social class rules here. You invite everyone to your dinner parties and you meet them on their terms. You don't expect them to come to you on your terms. Now, this was a challenging word to Jews in the first century because that meant they were to come into a household and eat their food regardless of purity laws. There's no sense here that Jesus says, well, you eat with them as long as they're pure enough for you to eat their food. No, no, no. Jesus actually says, you eat with them and you eat whatever they serve you. Love trumps the purity laws. In other words, as we move into the world, we are to not adjust our lives so that we sin and break covenant along with others, but we don't let other people's patterns of lives that might not be what we agree with to prevent us from fellowshipping with them. Jesus gave us the model, right? He went to dinner party after dinner party with people whose behavior he didn't agree with, but he put their behavior as a secondary issue to loving them because he knew this. Without love, the inner heart will not be transformed and therefore the behavior will never be addressed. The best way to help people out of lifestyles that are broken is to meet them where they're at in that lifestyle with love and then walk with them in humble, blessing sorts of ways, showing folks a different type of life. Pursue relationship on their terms and then begin to minister and love and bring the gospel. Next, he says, after you've met them on their terms, your fellowship, you're relating to them in ways that are understandable and approachable for them. Then, fourthly, he says, heal and cast out demons. In other words, bring freedom into people's lives from the power of the enemy. You know this about every human you'll ever meet. God loves them and Satan hates them. God has a wonderful plan for their life. It's called entering the kingdom and living within it. Satan has a disastrous plan for the life. It's called keeping them bound up in self-centeredness, their own little kingdom of self, and ultimately they destroy themselves. And so a major part of us bringing missionally the kingdom into the world is to bring liberation into people's lives from the powers of the enemy. It could be disease and demons like Jesus is talking about here. It could be lots of other things as well. Liberation from poverty. Liberation from being treated as a marginalized or lesser than type of person for being a female instead of a male, or being a whatever ways this a particular culture you're in categorizes people hierarchically. We are to be the community that levels that and that puts all human beings in the same category as loved by God. And that's part of the way that we liberate people from the powers of evil in this world. Finally, and it's now only at this point that Jesus says, now share the good news with them, the good news of the kingdom. In other words, when we come into the world, we don't start by preaching. We start by blessing, fellowshipping with, ministering to, loving on. And once they've seen a demonstration of the kingdom, only then do we say, let me explain to you what you've just seen and heard. If we flip that around, if we lead with a message of words and not of action, it's very easy for people to see us as hypocrites. Preaching, and which often leads to them seeing us as condemning them, instead of being blessed and loved on, and then in light of that, offering them a vision and understanding of the kingdom that now is an attractive path to follow, not a condemning, self-righteous thing to avoid. Jesus was just super wise in how he approached people. You meet them on their terms, You love and bless them, and then you bring the message of the gospel to hearts that are now prepared for it. Break. This is kind of a sectional break here. The next section will be the last section on Jesus in the Gospels, which is about his final week and death. Take a little break before we do that.